Good afternoon, everybody. Thank everybody for coming out today. My name is Eric Malice. I am the Chief Product Officer as well as the co-founder here at National Test Systems. I now have over 20 years experience. Seems like a long time, doesn't it? Ever since I started in this business, my brother and I started this, and he always was good at business. He knew how to, manage inventory. He knew how to manage the books and all that stuff. Meanwhile, my focus and my interest and my passion within this whole business has been to learn more about every technical aspect of it, really. I wanted to learn more about the drugs themselves. I wanted to know all about how the tests work, how the human physiology works, really every little thing I could get my hands on clinical toxicology, but especially as it relates to what we do, in other words, drug testing. So today is another in our ongoing series of educational webinars. Now, if you've worked with us for any amount of time or you've talked to any of the consultants for any amount of time, you know how important education is to us. And I see a fair amount of you here, and I thank you for that. It means that it's also important to you guys, and that's huge. I mean, education really is in our DNA. Anyone can sell you a drug test, but to really get behind it and make sure you guys understand everything. And really what we do is we want to make your drug testing duties a little bit easier, or at least a little bit more insightful. When you think of NTS, you should think of education, because that's really, really what we're all about. So we got about 25 minutes today, depending on how many tangents I go off on, and at the end of which I'll be able to answer any questions you may have. You'll see on the left side of your screen, there's tabs for people, questions, polls, and chats. Go ahead and use chats if you want to chat among yourself, but if you would, for questions directed to me, if you would use that question section, that would be easiest for me to make sure we get to them all. Excuse me. If for some reason we don't get to all your questions today, just know that your consultant will be reaching out in the next couple of days, and they'll answer any questions that we missed, obviously. They'll also give you an opportunity to make suggestions for topics for future webinars, or chance to have training between me and your staff, either on this subject or another subject that you feel might be helpful to you and your staff. So please, it's a resource that we hope you appreciate, a resource we hope you'll take advantage of. So what are we talking about today? Today, we're going to focus on current drug trends. We're going to talk about new drugs to watch for. We're going to talk about, drugs that we've been talking about for 20 years that are either on the rise or kind of falling out of favor. It's a little bit of everything so that we know what's out in the street and really know what to be on the lookout for. We're also going to have a little bit of a focus on the end section called designer drugs and what that term may mean. It's not a set term, but we'll go into a little more detail on that when we get there. So this is good information to have. It's nice to know, what's popular, what people are most likely using out in your neighborhoods. So what are my sources? So two main sources we're drawing information from today is the DEA's National Drug Threat Assessment. This is a report that's put out annually. And it's a very thorough report. It's compilations of DEA and other law enforcement reporting from all over the country. And it really, really gets into a lot of different interesting categories and a lot of interesting topics. In addition to the, in addition to the subjects we're going to cover today, it's got information on transnational gangs and street gangs and money laundering and all this other stuff. Now, this year's report is relatively short. This one only came in at 100 pages, whereas last year's was like 164 or something like that. When we post the recording to this webinar, I'll make sure I include a link to both this report that I'm talking about and also the landing page for the DEA's Emerging Threat Report. That's a report that's released quarterly, biannually, and annually, and that's more focused on the designer drug aspect of things. Now, it's important to note, this information takes a long time for the DEA to compile. If you can tell in this graphic, this was released in March of 2021. So it's not like January 1st, this thing hits the street. It takes a while for them to compile this. It takes even longer than that. And most of the graphs and charts I'm going to show you end either in 2018 or 2019. And again, this is just because it takes them so long to compile and report all this information. So because of this, I spend another 100 or so hours going through local and national media reporting, through law enforcement reporting. And basically, I try and round out the time frame so we know if this is a continuation that we're looking at into 2020 or if that information is already old. So I'll try and round that out whenever it is possible. All right, so let's jump right into it. The first thing that they report on is something called controlled prescription drugs. And this is really prescriptions that you think of as being a drug of abuse, really. Everything on this list here is something that would make you intoxicated or get you high. So this is a good list. Now, last year, the list for this particular section was on overdose deaths. So that's a good number to know. But I like this one even more. This is showing the number of prescriptions. And just so you know, this is in billions. So when we look at the hydrocodone in 2010 at the bottom there, that's 8.1 billion hydrocodone prescriptions in the year 2010. That's a lot of prescriptions. You can see now as we move past 2014, the numbers on the hydrocodone and the oxycodone, the first blue and orange sections, is shrinking. And that's great news because we had obviously had a big problem in this country with pill mills and oxycodone use and all this stuff. But as those decline, we see other drugs catching up a little on the list. We see amphetamines making a comeback. We see methylphenidate, which is Ritalin, making a kind of a bigger chunk out of this chart than it has in the past. Buprenorphine's up a little bit as well. Now, the reason that this chart is so important is I am a firm believer that a lot of drug abuse starts in the family medicine cabinet. So, mom got Vicodin for her tooth that was pulled, and she didn't, eat them. She didn't take them all. So now there's this, abusable, dangerous opioid just in the family medicine cabinet. All of these drugs listed are, again, you can see just by the sheer number of prescriptions out there, this is just essentially as good as drugs on the street. So it's important to note that since so much drug abuse and misuse begins in the medicine cabinet, it is important to see how many of these things are out there and realize that, it's not something that should be just left hanging around in an unlocked medicine cabinet. So do be aware of that. Excuse me. Next on our list, the report did something different this year. So in the past, they have had separate sections for heroin and for fentanyl. I was going to say for some reason, but I could pretty much guess the reason they decided to go this route. Because there is so much there's so much fentanyl in heroin these days, it just made more sense to combine these two sections. The two are almost intermeshed like this. Now, fentanyl could get its own focus, and it does. And I've done webinars specifically on fentanyl for this very reason. I mean, it's such a huge part of the epidemic that's going on right now, the drug epidemic anyway, not that other one. It's such a huge part of that epidemic that it kind of does require its own word. So while I'm not going to spend a ton of it here because we are looking at everything all together, just know that if it would have been me making this report, I probably still would have kept the heroin and the fentanyl separate. But listen, I don't work for the DEA, so that's fine. So what we're looking at here in this chart, now last year's chart, we used overdose deaths, which I do like using overdose deaths because it's an excellent measure, and it really shows the impact of what some of these drugs are doing. But what we're looking at here for this is actually heroin seizures as reported to the National Forensic Laboratory Information Systems. So the NFLIS is basically a national warehouse, essentially, of information. And they basically gather information on every law enforcement seizure of drugs across the country. So as we can see, this is heroin. So you can see, 2014, it was at 5,541. 2019, it's over 100,000. That's a 20-time increase in 5 years. So that's a huge, huge increase. Now, when I looked at the 2020 numbers on this one, we could see that it had flattened out even more. But keep in mind, this is heroin and not fentanyl. So once we mix the two, as you'll see on the next slide, that number continues to skyrocket a lot faster than this chart would indicate. So let's go to that slide now. Excuse me. So this is identifications of heroin and fentanyl together. And then as you can see, as the chart gets into 2018, 2019, we start seeing fentanyl and cocaine, and we start seeing fentanyl and methamphetamines. That's all very scary too. But look at the numbers here. We went from 1,460 identifications of fentanyl in 2014 to 58,000. That's almost a 200 times increase, if my math is right on that one. And again, that's only in 5 years. When I look at the numbers for 2020, and again, you can see from 2018 to 2019, it went only, maybe 8% or something like that. So it has slowed a little, but it's slowing at a very, very high plateau. I mean, there is a lot of fentanyl on the street. There's a lot of overdose deaths on fentanyl, and it can't be overstated how much of an impact fentanyl is really having in our country these days. So bear this in mind. And then again, as you can see, we're seeing fentanyl mixed with methamphetamine. Now, a lot of this is purely due to impurities. They're not necessarily cleaning their surface areas that well when they're working with these different materials. So when the pill press goes from making fake fentanyl pills that look like oxy to fake methamphetamine pills that look like oxy, there's still a lot of that fentanyl contamination. So that's the reason we see so much fentanyl in cocaine and in methamphetamine. All right, speaking of cocaine, that is next on our list. So this is a chart showing both the cultivation of the coca leaves and of the pure cocaine production. Now we can see that it really went way, way down toward 2011, 2012, started picking up in about 2014, and then kind of plateaued at around 2017, and 2017 to 2019, we can pretty much consider that flat. So while cocaine use is up, cocaine production is up compared to 5 years ago, it's not on this crazy continued upward trajectory like fentanyl is, luckily. So cocaine is still a big problem in our country. Obviously, you can see just how much of it there is being made. Most of that gets here. The purity is up, the price is down. So that's all contributing to the popularity of cocaine. But luckily, it's not run away yet. So hopefully it'll stay where it is or go back down. But this is what we're looking at about now. The bright side in this, and I always try and find a bright side if I can, is that crack is not making much of a comeback at all. So while cocaine, again, the last 5 years has certainly made an impact, crack hasn't followed right along with it. We don't want to see another crack epidemic like we had in the 80s. Anyone who's 50 plus like me, there, I said it. Anyone who's old enough to remember knows that we had a really, really bad crack epidemic in this country back in the 80s. So we definitely don't want to go back there. Excuse me. Next on the list is methamphetamine. Now, this might be one of the scariest charts that I have in this entire presentation for you today. So last year we had seizures at the southwest border, which is a good indicator because most of methamphetamine coming into this country is being made in Mexico and does come across the southwest border. These huge freight trucks and all this, they usually, you may have seen on the news like cantaloupes, but if you open the cantaloupe, it's stuffed with methamphetamine, or it's, car parts. When you open the car parts, there's stuff with methamphetamine. I had one last year where they were taking hammocks and soaking it in a liquid version of methamphetamine, letting it dry, and then when it got to its destination, they would simply extract the methamphetamine out of these cotton hammocks. So they're certainly very clever when it comes to sneaking these things into the country. And it's usually in these huge cargo shipping containers because no one's going to try and sneak in this much methamphetamine. It's not very profitable for the people who do it. Especially when I get to the next part of this, you'll understand a little bit more why. But so this right here is, again, based on the NFLIS, and we see a huge, huge increase in the number of seizures of methamphetamine. Just the jump from 2018 to 2019 almost doubles from 39,000 to 68,000. So methamphetamine is becoming a huge problem in this country. It already was. It's becoming a much worse. Excuse me. Don't know if it'll ever reach fentanyl-like proportions, but it's still something to definitely be on the lookout for. So like I said, most of the fentanyl is made in Mexico, and the chart on the bottom right kind of bears this out. The bottom right chart is showing labs that are being dismantled or taken down in the United States. So in Mexico, these cartels have a lot of money, and they have these incredible super labs. These labs would make a pharmaceutical company jealous. They're state of the art. They're huge. They can crank out a ton of this high purity, low cost methamphetamine for distribution all over the world. Now, the good news about the bottom right chart, even though it's allowing the cartels to have higher market share, basically, is the chart on the bottom right is for U.S.-based labs, methamphetamine labs. Now, the reason this is such good news is you don't want a methamphetamine lab in your neighbor's house blowing up. You watched the news 5 years ago, or when this peaked in around 2010 or so, that was happening on what seemed like a daily basis. You would hear about it in the news or read about it in the newspaper that another methamphetamine lab blew up in somebody's neighborhood. So, either in a trailer park or, somewhere well populated. So again, little bit of good news, a little bit of silver lining in the black cloud of methamphetamine. All right, so here's where we should. Oh no, I'm sorry. One more. I almost forgot about marijuana. It's become so low on the totem pole. I almost forgot about it. So the reporting on marijuana in this DEA report is getting much more, much more limited as more and more states legalize it either for medicinal use or recreational use. We're seeing a big decline in the black market for marijuana. So last year we did a chart based on the NFLIS reports, which I liked so much. This year, this is NFLIS by state. It didn't give me a combined chart. This is NFLIS by state. But if we total up, we're looking at about 344,000 plus from 2018 to 270,000 plus for the year of 2019. So this is to be expected. As the licit market grows, the illicit market shrinks. It's weird. I mean, even in states with a huge recreational market like California, there's still a black market. There's always going to be a black market. Listen, there's a black market right now for cigarettes and for alcohol, and both these things are very legal. So it's not completely surprising. Some people would rather, go to a shady dealer's house and walk into a, state-of-the-art storefront to buy their marijuana. But, who can say? That's what's going on still in a lot of these states. Now, the reason that this is actually good news, and whether your stance is for or against legalization of marijuana, it's hard to argue with the fact that taking money out of the illicit market, taking money out of the cartel's pocket, taking money out of the whole black market underground system that's there is a good thing. It leaves them less funding for other illicit activity that's much, much more dangerous than marijuana. So again, silver lining in there somewhere. Now we move on. So this is the part where we move into the emerging threat report. And again, this one is updated a lot more frequently. It's a lot thinner on information, but it's still very important information. I'm going to dive into it a little bit with you. But first, this is what the DEA calls new psychoactive substances. This is what we call, or what I call, I should say, designer drugs. When I think of designer drug, it's complete synthetic, and it's made to mimic the effects of a naturally occurring substance. So the two most popular that come into mind are the K2, K3 spice and the bath salts. So let's look a little bit closer at that. So with K2, K3 spice, it's a synthetic cannabinoid. In other words, synthetic meaning it's completely fabricated in a laboratory, no natural ingredients. And it's a cannabinoid in that it's meant to stimulate or work with the cannabinoid receptors in the human body. It's meant to mimic the effects of the THC. So again, that meets my two criteria. It's synthetic and it's mimicking the effects of a naturally occurring substance. Now, as you can see from the list on the right, there's over 100 different synthetic cannabinoids that have been discovered or synthesized. Now, most of these are horrible, horrible drugs. And if you've read any stories about, there's one 2 years ago, I think, something in Brooklyn, like a whole street of people was basically lolling about in the street and in the alleys and on the sidewalks because they had a dose or a batch of some really horrific K2, K3 spice. So most of the things on this list are really more dangerous than not. But not everything that's a synthetic cannabinoid is necessarily a bad thing. There's, for example, there's one called nabilone, which is an actual prescription medication that is a synthetic cannabinoid. It is given mainly in Canada. They use it for pain and for chemotherapy side effects. So just because it has the word synthetic cannabinoid in it doesn't necessarily automatically make it a bad thing. But if it's on this list and you're buying it from a gas station or some dude on the corner, no, it's probably not going to be good for you or very helpful to you at all. So do keep that in mind. And then the other one that we talk about so much is bath salts. So bath salts, again, synthetic, meaning it's completely fabricated in a laboratory, and it's a cathinone. It's a class of drugs that's trying to mimic the effects of the cat plant. In case you're unaware, bath salts is a very, very strong stimulant. In other words, it amps you up, it gives you energy, it really gets your nervous system amped up and can give you extreme paranoia, which is why we hear a lot of the horror stories. South Florida, you hear about Flacca, it was really bad, and other places. I would say nothing on this list, this 200 plus synthetic cathinone list, I would say nothing on this list is good for you. So just avoid this one like the plague if you can. None of these are very good. So here's really where the emerging threat report comes in. So this is pulled, this is actually from the year-end 2020 report. And this breaks down all of the seizures of both synthetic cannabinoids and synthetic cathinones and tells us which ones are out there. So if you tell me, oh, I got people in my, in my neighborhood or my area and using bath salts, I want to test for it. We're going to say, do you know which of the 200 cathinones it is? Because if it's one that we have a test for, great. But if it's something like On the right there, you see some of these lesser popular ones like 4-CEC. They only identified this once in the entire country this year. Well, if that was in your neighborhood, there's not a test for 4-CEC. So this is important information because it is coming out regularly, quarterly, and you can see the changing landscape and how they choose different target substances to try to avoid detection, try and avoid, legal hassles and that sort of thing. So the good news is about a 23% decrease from 2019 to 2020 in synthetic cannabinoids, and that's good. And we always want to see a downward trend for these things. So that's a pretty good decrease. Unfortunately for cathinones, from 2019 to 2020, we actually went up 9%. So hopefully they'll get a handle on that. This is, again, nothing on that 200 plus list was good for you at all. So we've got a couple of new things, actually, which is very new to the emerging threat report. So there's now a class of drugs that the DEA is calling designer benzodiazepines. Now, listen, I might argue their terminology because benzodiazepines are already a full synthetic substance. There's no naturally occurring, you don't go to a root of a plant and get benzodiazepines. So it's not trying to mimic the effects of another naturally occurring substance. But for the sake of convenience and to keep these separate from other benzodiazepines, this is probably an okay term. I'm not going to grouse about it too bad. So there were 295 seizures or identifications of designer benzodiazepines during this reporting period. That represents an approximately 157% increase from calendar year 2019. So that is scary right there. So most of these benzodiazepines, these designer benzodiazepines, they were developed, but for whatever reason, either they were found not to be effective, they were found to be too dangerous, found to be too effective and couldn't get a small enough dosage. For whatever reason, these never became popular. These never ended up on a pharmacist's shelf. This never ended up on a doctor's prescription pad. They're just not as good as the benzos, the licit benzos that we have already. Valium and Xanax have been working for 50 years. So they decided, these are fine, they're benzos, but we don't need 20 different kind of benzos. We don't need 50 different kinds of benzos. So again, these are benzos that never really made it to any, with any real popularity. Now the danger here is, unfortunately, none of the ones that I have come across so far will be detected on a standard benzo panel. Excuse me. So as for now, if these things are in your neighborhood and these things are going around, there's not much you can do to detect it. Or really nothing you can do to detect it. So I do apologize for not having a silver lining for you on that one. But unfortunately, that is where we are on the designer benzos at this time. But just know about them anyway. Another substance we've been hearing a lot about this year is something called tianepine, or colloquial known as Tiana. And you can see on the right there, I've got pictures of a couple of different brands. So this is being sold as a supplement. So because of this, the DEA does not step in. The DEA does not step in. You can go to GNC and buy this stuff now. Now, tianepine is basically what they call an atypical antidepressant. And basically, atypical means it just doesn't work the way most antidepressants work. That's really all that means. Another substance we've been hearing a little bit about this year is one called Phenibut. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm sure someone will correct me in the comments later. And this is another atypical antidepressant that is being sold as a substance. And again, they're both mild sedatives. The tianepine actually affects some of the opioid receptors in the body, not enough to be considered an opioid, but enough to be considered highly addictive. So do be aware of these if you see them. They typically come in powder and capsule form, and these particular substances, both this and the Phenibut. And then the last designer substance we've got for this year is something called delta-8 tetrahydrocannabinol, or more commonly known as delta-8. So basically, much like THC, regular delta-9 THC, delta-8 THC is a component of marijuana, same as CBD, same as some of these other ones that we see out there. The market where CBD was so huge is now being essentially taken over by this delta-8, or being shared by this delta-8. So where you used to be to walk into a head shop or a smoke shop or your neighborhood convenience store and buy the buy the CBD cartridges or gummies or the flower. The same thing is now happening with this delta-8. The huge difference between delta-8 and CBD is, for most accounts, CBD is not an intoxicant. It doesn't get you high. However, delta-8 absolutely will. It's from what I've read, it's a similar high to marijuana high, to regular delta-9 THC high, but it's a little bit different. Do have good news on this one, however, and this one will be detected on the standard THC panel that you're probably already using. So at least you've already got your tools in the box for this one. All right, great. Looks like we've got at least a question, so let me get to that. Why has the FDA not waived fentanyl immunoassay? Any idea when they will? Stephen, it's typically, as much as I like to blame the FDA, it really is the manufacturers themselves. It's kind of a business decision, which sounds horrible. They basically have to spend a lot of money to go through the process to get a panel waived. And then once the door is open, every other company can just pile right on in, right behind it, with a lot less cost and a lot less work. So I'm afraid, and I don't know this, and I don't know any background information. I'm not the manufacturer. I am afraid this is going to be almost a standoff for a little while. My fingers are crossed that that this does get resolved soon. It's causing a lot of problems for a lot of people, and I understand that, and I feel for you for whatever that's worth. All right, Bobby asks for, he probably just made up that word, methamphetamine. Actually, no, I've heard about this one once or twice. This one is an analog of methamphetamine. It is sort of similar to the amphetamine class. It's like a prodrug or a prologue to methamphetamine. It's a stimulant as well. Unfortunately, that one is not going to be detected on a standard amp or methamphetamine panel. And I believe it is also being sold as a supplement. I'm sorry, I would have to double check that. And if you want, I have record of this, so I will look it up and let you know if I can find out for sure on that. Next for Christopher asks, what is the will the test detect the new Delta 10 THC also? Unfortunately, I have not had an opportunity to try any of the other Delta THCs to see if they also will affect it. I have a feeling they will because they are all very, very closely related. I have somebody I know in my life who will actually go out and try these things for me and let me test them. So I will save this question as well, and I'll try and get you an answer in the coming days. And Chris asks, what about xylazine? Does a test exist for this? Not that I am aware of. If anyone's not aware, xylazine is basically it's a sedative / anesthetic, mostly used for veterinary uses. Actually, I think it's only for veterinary uses. So while it's not on the DEA drug schedule, right now it's intended only for veterinary uses, so it shouldn't be easy to get. It's not like this tianepine where you can just walk into GNC and buy it. Excuse me. But I will keep an eye on that one as well. But as for right now, unfortunately, no tests for it. Derek wants to know if the slides are available or we can research more on this information. Derek, yeah, the slides definitely are. I don't think the slideshow is that helpful on its own. Like I said, we are going to post a recording of this on the website either later today or tomorrow. I will save this question and send you a link. But on that page, I will make sure that we post the link to both the two sources of information that I am using today. All right, looks like I got everybody. Listen, thank you guys so much for coming out. I really do appreciate it. It's nice to see that there are, so many people here that warrant continuing these webinars. It really shows me that I'm not alone in my want to, give information or, share information. And I think it really will make your daily drug testing duties, a little bit easier, or like I said, at least a little bit more insightful. So I do appreciate that. So until next time, keep testing.